Welcome. I'm Brian Lehrer. Suddenly, November feels much closer. It is 2016, election year, and it's less than 4 weeks to the Iowa caucuses, 5 to the New Hampshire primary. But there's something else telescoping time, the demeanor of our current president. Yesterday, surrounded by families from Sandy Hook, San Bernardino, and other killing fields, a graying and tearful president, knowing well his executive actions were only a small step, urged a long march against gun violence, one that would not include him.
And yes, it will be hard. And it won't happen overnight. It won't happen during this Congress. It won't happen during my presidency.
Here's another clue the presidential election is not so far off. More mud on the air. Increasingly, mudslinging ads are darkening TV and computer screens in the early voting states. This ad from the PAC, Keep the Promise, supports Iowa frontrunner Ted Cruz. I won't spoil it by revealing who it attacks.
Yeah, I know I have a debate, but I got to get this fantasy football thing right. Okay.
Keep the Promise One is responsible for the content of this advertising.
The winner of this week's Out of Context Award, the Rubio line, was from a spoof he taped. Jeb Bush has also gone negative on Rubio, hoping a vote against Marco will somehow become a vote for Jeb. This ad comes from Jeb's PAC, Right to Rise.
Days after the Paris attacks, senators came together for a top-secret briefing on the terrorist threat. Marco Rubio was missing, fundraising in California instead. 2 weeks later, terrorists struck again in San Bernardino. And where was Marco? Fundraising again in New Orleans. Over the last 3 years, Rubio has missed important national security hearings and missed more total votes than any other senator. Politics first. That's the Rubio way. Right to Rise USA is responsible for the content of this message.
Rubio's PAC, Conservative Solutions, isn't wasting money counterattacking Jeb. It takes aim at a more formidable target, Chris Christie, who is a threat in New Hampshire, where Rubio might need a solid showing to stay viable, especially if Cruz and Trump trounce him in Iowa.
Chris Christie could well be Obama's favorite Republican governor. Why? Christie's record. He instituted an internet sales tax, supported Common Core, and liberal energy policies. Incredibly, Christie even backed Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. Chris Christie, one high-tax, Common Core, liberal energy-loving, Obamacare Medicaid expanding president, is enough. Conservative Solutions PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Other negative ads attack Christie for Bridgegate and New Jersey's deficit, but he says he welcomes them all as a sign he is gaining traction in New Hampshire. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has produced his first ad, which he says he doesn't really need but feels guilty not buying a few because his campaign is so under budget. It does not attack other Republicans, although that might change soon if they begin to go after him more directly or Trump continues to slump in the polls. Trump is reportedly ready to spend $2 million a week on ads out of his own pocket. In this first ad, note how the pictures of Hillary and Barack side by side cut to another threatening pair who just happen to be terrorists.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
The politicians can pretend it's something else, but Donald Trump calls it radical Islamic terrorism. That's why he's calling for a temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until we can figure out what's going on. He'll quickly cut the head off ISIS and take their oil. And he'll stop illegal immigration by building a wall on our southern border that Mexico will pay for.
We will make America great again.
thanks to PolitiFact, we know that the people running across the border in that ad are not Mexicans streaming into the USA, as the voiceover suggests, but Moroccans seeking refuge in a Spanish enclave in Africa. But staying in Trump's apology-free zone, his campaign manager said the footage was put there on purpose to show what America could look like without Donald at the helm. But it's not immigration, but guns that are the issue of the day. Let's look at this marathon through that lens. Yes, it's time for the horse race. Ted Cruz's political career was launched defending the constitutionality of guns for personal protection. Turns out he is riding a wave that recently has come up. According to a national survey of gun owners, Pew Research found that in 1999, many more gun owners cited hunting as the reason why they own guns. But in February of 2013, those numbers flipped, with 48% of gun owners saying that personal protection was the main reason they owned a gun. Just 32% said they owned their gun for hunting purposes. And while Obama may be right that voters overwhelmingly agree with several regulations, like the extension of background checks and efforts to prevent the mentally ill from obtaining a gun, the public is still divided along party lines, specifically on who should handle the issue. In a Pew Research poll released just last month, 43% said that Republicans are better at reflecting their views on gun control versus fewer, 37%, who said Democrats best represent them, a gap that has been exploited by politicians, especially Tea Party Republicans. In May of 2013, when the Senate rejected the Manchin-Toomey bill to extend background checks to internet and gun show sales, many politicians publicly supported background checks, but few Tea Party Republicans wanted the legislation to actually pass. The reason? Fear that the bill would be a slippery slope to even more gun controls, a fear made vividly clear by the Ted Cruz campaign last night in their response to Obama's new initiative. This image of Obama in combat gear ominously telling voters that he, quote, wants your guns. And even before Obama spoke, Cruz reacted, we don't beat the bad guys by taking away our guns. He said we beat the bad guys by using our guns. How could this issue affect the horse race? Well, according to the latest field poll of likely California voters, Ted Cruz has already caught up to and surpassed Trump, now leading him by 2 percentage points there, with Rubio inching his way into third place at 13%. Both Carson and Fiorina have subsequently fallen, clearing the way for the 3 national front runners. In Iowa, Real Clear Politics poll averages showed Ted Cruz expanding his lead over Trump, while Rubio has maintained a solid third place, and Carson again continues to fall. In New Hampshire, Trump continues to lead, but in these final weeks, he has been on a downward trend since mid-December, which may be little comfort to the mainstream GOP as they suffer from the abundance of a broad and fractious field of insider candidates. On the Democratic side, Hillary continues to trounce Bernie in national polling and endorsements. Obama's putting guns front and center in front of Democrats might not be the best news for Sanders, who had been trending up in Iowa since mid-December, but currently trails Clinton by almost 13 percentage points. On the other hand, in New Hampshire, Bernie is more than 4 points ahead of Hillary. O'Malley barely registers there at 2%. All right, time to discuss the issues with our guests. They come from different points of view, but the same internet generation. Zeeshan Aleem on the left writes about politics for Mike.com, and on the right, Ryan Girdusky, who writes for RedAlert.com. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for coming in. Zeeshan, the president obviously feels strongly about the gun issue. He was crying on camera in front of the nation, for heaven's sakes. But does this hurt the Democrats in the presidential election? Because the gun issue, despite how this baffles Democrats, seems to benefit Republicans time after time.
You know, the public is sharply divided on guns, and as you mentioned earlier, they're divided heavily along partisan lines. It's a sort of issue that, at the moment, probably could help mobilize some Democrats, especially the ones who lean further left in the base. There's been a lot of excitement over the fact that Obama is trying to circumvent gridlock in Congress and actually try to take action on the issue with his executive actions. there's very positive reception from the progressive community, from gun control community regarding these kind of things. And it seems like people were sort of waiting for him to take issues into his own hands.
Do you think, Ryan, that just like we saw with another social issue, gay marriage, that there is a generational thing here? Younger Republicans, even if they're conservative on other things, tend now to support legal gay marriage. Do you think guns, which often get lumped in with, gays and abortion as like the three big social issues, is there a similar thing happening generationally?
No, because guns is the culture war Democrats lost. They won on gay marriage, but they lost on guns. If Pew Research did a poll last year, 52% of Americans, for the first time, a majority of Americans said protecting the Second Amendment is more important than us putting gun control first. And the biggest growing segments of gun owners are women and minorities. They're not just white men in trucks anymore. This is where the Democrat base is. And so if you're in Ohio and you're a suburban mom, or North Carolina, and you're reading about stories about crime increasing, which it has across every city, almost every major city in the United States, and you get yourself a handgun, and they're talking about how to regulate it, how to do this, how to take it away, all guns are bad, that's a major detractor against voting for a Democrat.
Any disagreement as a generational issue?
Well, I'd say that one of the key questions here is, what exactly we're talking about when we talk about gun control. So if you look at things like expanding background checks, there's actually a broad consensus across age groups, across political affiliation, that more expansive background checks are good, which is why Obama's recent executive actions aren't likely to stir that much controversy in terms of the substance of the policy. When you talk about other things like, say, bans on assault weapons, that tends to be a lot more controversial. So for the first time in the last 20 years, support for bans on assault weapons have dipped below 50%. So that's the sort of thing where you can imagine it's more polarized.
Right, and most people, assault weapons is not a real thing. They're talking about semi-automatic weapons, which is not, a machine gun that blows 400 bullets per second. A lot of these politicians...
Still, if we're talking about an AR-15 or an Uzi, those are powerful weapons.
Yes, but the average American is not buying an Uzi. They're buying a gun that shoots one bullet, but you don't have to reload it. So it's a semi-automatic weapon. Gun owners know what that means. And as the gun-owning population has increased, especially there's 350 million guns in this country, and it increases into segments that were traditionally Democratic Party voters, they're going to lose those votes. This is what happened to Al Gore. He sat there and said, I'm going to run on an anti-gun message, and he ran himself out of the presidency.
Ryan, what do you make of Trump's actual support? Is this really a big national movement, or is this, when you come right down to it, as 25 or 30% of the 20% of Americans who are likely to vote in Republican primaries, if that's even the number, is this really a sliver of a sliver?
Right. It's amazing. Every single month, Trump has a new ceiling that he can't break through. Every single month, I hear someone from establishment conservative Inc. saying, "Oh no, 25%, no 30%, 40%. This is where Trump has to stop." No, it's a major thing. If you look at polls across the country on, take Donald Trump's biggest issue, immigration. Take a poll by Gallup, by Pew, decade after decade after decade, a plurality, if not a majority of Americans have said, slow down legal immigration. Not illegals, but slow down legal immigration every single year. All he sat there and said was, hey, we should slow down legal immigration. And everyone's saying, I can't believe, why is he responding? America's been saying this for decades.
Zeeshan, what do you make of the Trump phenomenon? How big is it, and what do you think it actually reflects about the state of the country?
Well, until the primaries actually begin, the polling numbers can be deceptive. Oftentimes, a candidate can be very popular and then just sort of plunge when things start going in Iowa and New Hampshire. But Trump does mean something. His popularity, at the very least, is a proxy for something in the GOP base that is very concerned with, basically immigration and policies regarding counterterrorism. Broadly, you could group it under the umbrella of concern of outsiders or intruders. And regardless of whether or not Trump fares well in the polls in the coming future, the other candidates, of course, have to sort of appropriate his message in order to be able to kind of keep their own momentum going.
And the Democrats, I think, are trying to merge the two issues of guns and terrorism, that keeping us safe from terrorists involves, whatever else it involves, restricting access to guns. Now that we saw, the way the attack came down in San Bernardino, you're laughing.
Yeah, because Democrats' approach to this is, let's open the borders to anyone who wants to come here, and then let's take guns away from Americans who need to protect themselves from dangerous possible terrorists. That's the Democratic approach, which absolutely makes no sense whatsoever.
Zeeshan?
Well, I mean, you did see Obama join the sort of issues with San Bernardino, but I do think in general the Democrats tend to keep the issues disentangled. And I think they're smart to do that. People approach guns very differently than terrorism here. Gun control is something that's very divisive, and people have, as we discussed earlier, very, very different views on them, while counterterrorism is something that tends to actually produce a lot of consensus in the American body politic. Oftentimes when there's a terrorist attack, the entire country tends to swing to the right on issues ranging from surveillance to more aggressive foreign policy.
You know what there isn't consensus on? Even what the big issues are, it seems, between the parties. Republicans more or less terrorism as the top issue to be concerned about. Democrats, I think, still list economic issues as more what to be concerned about, and I think you certainly see this in what the candidates are talking about from each party on the campaign trails. Does that make sense to you as somebody who might lean more toward the Democrats' issue? Are the Republicans talking too much about terrorism? Are the Democrats talking too little about it?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, the parties and their followers tend to have different priorities. I did look at a poll in December, a very credible poll that showed that terrorism was a top concern across political lines, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that there's a disparity between Democrats and Republicans. I think for the Republicans, it's a smart strategy. There's no limit to how much you can talk about terrorism and sort of fear-monger and talk about war. In that sense, you can't really exhaust the attention of the public, and Donald Trump has obviously rode this wave of popularity on stoking fears.
At the same time, Ryan, you have less than a chance of being struck by lightning, chance of being victim of an actual terrorist attack. The chance that your family is going to fall victim to the declining fortunes long-term of the middle class is much, 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 much higher.
Yeah, but if you are killed by a terrorist, you don't care what the chances are. You care that you got killed by a terrorist, or your family member did. And in places like San Bernardino, that matters a whole lot more. It's awakening. The chances are different depending upon things, but also Trump has, and being the leading frontrunner, has hit on the economy. He's talked about trade. He's talked about bringing back factory jobs. He's trying to hit back into the Rust Belt. About there's a chance for prosperity again. And I think that Democrats have been a little disingenuous with the American voter and trying to play to the hopes and fears of the American voter by offering a way towards higher growth and restoring the middle class without actually presenting a plan for growth.
Do you think millennials are going to vote in large numbers in the primaries? Bernie Sanders seems to be the biggest thing on campus.
Right.
But are people going to turn out on either side?
I think that people are going to vote for Bernie for sure. I think young people are very excited about Bernie. People that I know are really excited about Bernie. And I think that Trump is going to win a plurality of the youth vote for sure. I mean, that's what the polls indicate across the board. But is the turnout going to be huge? Probably not. I think it'd be higher than in 2012, but not significantly so.
You reported on some campus Trump chapters springing up.
Yes. There's a couple of kids outside from North Carolina that started a pro-Trump campus activism. I don't know how big it's actually forming. It's certainly not as big as the Bernie Sanders activism. And, it's really funny, though, because Rand Paul was really hoping to gain momentum from what his father did 4 years ago, where his father had tremendous support from the youth vote and from independents. But Rand's lost a lot of that, and because, he's not the outsider that he had hoped to be.
All right, you two stay there. We're going to bring in some additional evidence. Time for evidence-based politics, where we meet a scholar who has studied an issue oversimplified by campaign rhetoric. The election season so far has definitely been shaken up by not just Donald Trump, but his supporters. They are often described as white, working-class Americans who haven't fully recovered from the recession or long-term changes in the economy. But further insight on this right-wing populism may come from Germany. A new study there has found that as modern German manufacturing saw tougher competition from other countries, such as China, political parties on the far right were able to build more support And to explain this, we have Christian Dippel. He joins us via Skype. He is a professor of economics at UCLA. His working paper for the National Bureau of Economic Research is called Globalization and Its Discontent: Trade Shocks and Voting Behavior. Welcome. Hello from New York. Thank you for doing this, Professor.
Hi, Brian. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Let's put up a graph right away from your study, which shows that as trade increased, the support for the far-right party in Germany, or parties in Germany, also increased. What does this tell us?
Well, what we show is the paper is 50% about the fact that trade integration leads to more import competition, and it also leads to more export access for manufacturing workers in wealthy developed countries like Germany. And so 50% of the paper is about how do votes respond to this increased import competition, how do votes respond to this increased export access opportunities. And then the other half of the paper, the other 50%, is what explains the relationship. And so we really emphasize the labor market transmission channels that are between the trade competition or trade access and the voting outcomes.
It seems very rational, the way you lay it out, and very linear. The more jobs that are lost because of imports, the more people join far-right parties. The more jobs that are created because of exports, the fewer people join. Is it that rational in Germany? Is it that linear?
I don't know what either rational or linear means in that case, but the data says that what you just said is true. And so we have in Germany what's sort of nice, what you can't really do in the United States, is you've got this really broad party spectrum. And that party spectrum is really stable over time. So what we can actually do is we can look at small regions of Germany, so a unit that you call a local labor market. Think of that as perhaps a county. And we could look at how does voting behavior change over time in those regions as they're being hit with different sort of exogenous exposure to the global trading environment. And that can be a good thing, export access. It can be a bad thing, import competition. It depends on your industrial structure and what's happening in the rest of the global economy.
And your paper says that it's really only the far-right parties there that have responded to trade integration. The more moderate parties just don't deal with it at all, or don't find it to be their issue?
The more moderate parties don't respond. And so when you say the paper finds it, I just want to be clear that it is a very quantitative paper. And so when we say the paper finds it, it's the data says. The data says of the entire political spectrum, it's the far right where the action is. And so the mainstream doesn't see any action, the liberals don't see any action, and the far left doesn't see any action, or barely any.
So in a country like the United States with a two-party system, how do you see the German experience as analogous or not?
It's tricky. You know, it's speculative because it's out of sample. Germany doesn't have a Donald Trump or a Ted Cruz, and the United States doesn't have a far-right party. And so it's difficult to say. It's certainly what I think I would say, the finding that does travel, the generalizable part of it, is there's an element of populism. And it's probably true in most OECD countries that the political mainstream has a hard time positioning itself as in any way anti-globalization, because where's globalization coming from? It's coming from free trade agreements that the political mainstream is signing off on. And so as we're feeling these effects more strongly, it's got to be someone on the fringe who gets to benefit from that. And it's going to be highly country-specific who that is. You know?
You say we don't have a far right in the United States or a far right party analogous to those in Germany. Do you think that Donald Trump is that to any degree, because he actually is a conservative who opposes these free trade agreements as being bad for American workers, while most American conservatives support the free trade agreements because they're more pro-business? And at the same time, he's got some of the nativist elements, you know, of being anti-Muslim immigration, anti-Mexican immigration. So does Trump come closer to the European far-right parties than anything else we have in the United States?
Perhaps he comes closer than anything else we have in the United States, but he's still pretty far away. So I think I think if we had done a study of France, so I got to emphasize that what we're doing, you need all the data to come together in a way that's very difficult to bring together. And so it's very hard to find a context where you can study what we study. But suppose we had done this for France and we had found an effect on the Front National, so the Le Pen party. I would maybe be a little bit more comfortable drawing direct comparisons because the Le Pen party, the Front National, is in many ways far more moderate than these far-right parties in Germany. You know, they're advocating things that Donald Trump would never endorse.
And much bigger in France, right? Germany, maybe because of its history of having Nazism, is more allergic to that?
Well, yes. It's difficult to say because it's two sides of the same coin. One thing is that it's much smaller in Germany. The other aspect is the parties are much more extreme. And so it's two sides of the same coin.
Interesting.
So
let me see if our guests here in New York have a question for you or a thought on this.
I have a quick question for you. So the ADF, which is the main probably far-right party in Germany, they have only seen their poll numbers go up significantly so within the last few months since the Syrian refugee crisis. Do you think that, and if you look at nationwide, far-right parties everywhere from Argentina, Guatemala, Poland with the Law and Justice Party, Front National, UKIP, across the board have seen their numbers rise? Is it more of a correlation that's going on, that trade happens to be going on at the same time? There are other things causing this effect rather than just strictly being trade?
So we, applied economic researchers are very, very careful in sort of how we tease causation from correlation. And so I think it's certainly true that immigration correlates strongly with sort of anti-globalization sentiment. But the way that we set up our data, the basic natural experiment that you can think about in our data is we're not doing a region that's affected by immigration versus not affected by immigration. We're not doing a Rust Belt versus not Rust Belt region. We're doing within a set of manufacturing regions, given your industrial profile, do you happen to be specialized in industries that China happened to be expanding its supply in dramatically over the last decade? Or did you happen to be specialized in industries that Chinese consumption increased in dramatically? And so we're really separating that from these other things like immigration, which also matter.
And I have to jump in because we have 30 seconds left in the show. So Zeeshan, a last thought from you on what we've just been hearing.
Well, I was just thinking that, there is sort of a rhythm to things in American history, and we've had moments in the past where we've seen these kind of nativist impulse in response to economic insecurity from white Americans. If you look at, say, during the gold rush in California in the 19th century, the way that sort of European Americans responded to the influx of Chinese immigrants there was a whole movement to get Chinese people out of there and eventually led to a ban on Chinese immigration for close to a century.
And that is it. We thank you all for joining us this week. Finally, we should note that the Republican field is down to 12 now, with the dropping out of former New York Governor George Pataki. Pataki had been the most direct in warning against a Trump presidency with his Stand Up to Trump slogan. Pataki had also criticized his party for denying climate change, and he disagreed on some social issues such as abortion and gay rights. Personality apart, not the year for insider liberal Republicans. In leaving the race, Pataki said, "I am confident that we can elect the right person, someone who can bring us together." We will see about that. A reminder, President Obama's final State of the Union message is next Tuesday. We'll delve into that and the candidates' reactions on next week's show. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.